Hey guys, welcome to September's Joybox tutorial. We are painting the pumpkin and sunflower. Here's my example. If you haven't watched the unboxing and supply list video, go watch that. That talks about all your parts that you should have. It talks about your supplies and some other tips and tricks. So go check that out first. The link will be in the description below. We're gonna break the tutorial up in steps. So it's gonna be about 6 steps. Our first step is we're going to prep. Prepping just means that we're going to get ready to paint. So I'm going to take all my pieces and tape the small ones down. So you can use masking tape or washi tape, or if you have masking tape, that works. The only tape I don't recommend using is duct tape because it does tear the wood apart. The wood is plywood, meaning that they're just layers of wood, and duct tape tends to take that first layer off. It's too strong. So I don't recommend duct tape. So we're just going to tape all our pieces. In this step, you're also wanting to decide colors, what colors you want to paint things. Remember with painting that there are no rules. You do not have to paint anything exactly like I do. Paint them in the colors that you love. And also, there's no mistakes. With painting, if you paint a piece of color and you decide you don't like it, you can paint right over it. All right, so I've taped the small pieces down. I'm not going to tape these pieces down. And in actuality, in my example today, I'm not going to use these. We talked about how you can mix up different ways of creating this piece in the unboxing video, so go check that out for some different ideas. But I'm actually going to toss these. If you're going to paint these, hold on to them. You shouldn't need to tape them down. They're big enough that you don't need to. And I forgot my little stem here. I'm just going to create its own. I like to create a piece where I fold it over. I find that that gives me a good gripping piece, but you don't need to do that. They can all be taped together if you want. The other thing to take note is it's kind of helpful to tape pieces that you're going to paint the same color. So I know I'm going to paint all these the same color. I might mix it up with these pieces, but that helps keep your colors in line too. Obviously don't need to tape this, and we're not going to tape the frame piece here. So with the sunflower, we'll get this one taped down. I don't really need to tape my centers. Those are big enough. And my sunflower is big enough by itself. So I'm going to just tape the little leaf down. It's a little bit smaller. This will help hold it. And there we go. Okay. So that's our prep. I've got my colors picked out here. An antique wax color. You can use a dark brown to create a stain. This is actually they got stain within a wax, and so it creates a smooth waxy finish. This is the brand from Walmart. There's an antique wax, Waverly, I believe it is. I've got a pumpkin, a golden sunset, or a king's gold, a light brown graham cracker, and then a Tuscan teal, which is a dark teal. I've got a white here, and let me grab my red out. I'm going to use a Spanish red. Now, we talked about colors and how I'm using paint colors, house paint colors, room paint colors, the Sherwin-Williams colors. I do link and create a list of colors that match these colors with an apple barrel color. So if you're using craft paint, the list in the list here is apple barrel colors, and they match up to what I'm going to be using. So I've just got a bunch of just different fall colors out, and we'll get started. Okay. So step 2 is where I do a base coat on everything. So I'm going to put a light coat on everything. Remember, wood is super porous, so as you're painting your pieces, you might want to add just a little bit of water to that base coat. The second coat, you don't need to add water, but the water will help your paint flow. Your base coat is like your primer. It's going to, create a seal on the wood so that the next set of coats that you do, we don't need water, and it just helps that paint flow on the bare wood because it is super porous. It's going to soak up that paint. So I'm going to go through and paint a base coat on everything. There's a couple different ways that you can paint. I'm going to use the first piece that I paint is my base, and I'm going to use the baby white method. That's going to create a faux stained look. So let's do that, and then we will use the other techniques here in just a little bit. So we'll start with this. This is the first video I've done in like 8 months, so excuse me if I jump around a little bit. I had my system down pretty packed, but now we're gonna have to start over. So excuse me if I jump around a little bit, but we will get there, guys. We will get there. It's all about getting creative anyways. And feel free to mute me and just start painting if I get too talky, because sometimes I do that. All right, so a faux stain method. I'm going to paint my base a dark color this time. I did a light color in this one, but I'm going to mix it up. You'll notice I like to mix it up and do something a little bit different, in hopes to inspire you to use your own colors and do different things too. So we're going to start with a dark brown color. I'm using that antique wax. If you don't have an antique wax, use a dark brown, burnt umber or something like that. Okay, so for the baby white method, I just fold it in half, wrap it around my finger, and then I'm going to dip my finger into the paint or wax or whatever you're using, and I'm just going to rub it on. And you'll notice that I'm seeing that lovely wood grain. The baby white helps the paint or wax or whatever you're using flow really well because the baby wipe is wet. And so we don't need to add any water to the paint when we're doing this method. You'll notice though that the baby wipe will start to dry out. It's starting to tear, so I know it's drying out. And so I'm just going to move to a new area that's wet now, that's still got that dampness. Grab some more and rub it on. Eventually the wood will soak up all moisture from your baby wipe, and you'll notice that it really is getting hard to rub that color in. When that happens, I just move to a new area that's still got some of that moisture in there and continue on. Now, if you're using a paint color, still just go with light coats. If you want a darker stain, that first coat's going to be really light colored. It's going to look probably a little blotchy. And then our second coat, we can darken it up a little bit. Okay, so here we are. It's pretty light. I'm thinking I want it to be darker, but I'm gonna do my base coat, light coats, and then we'll come back with that second coat. Okay. So next I'm gonna paint my frame, and I'm doing the baby white method again. I think I'm gonna do a black. I'm gonna introduce a little bit of black into this and go with some dark colors this time. Using that baby white method. I'm just gonna get all these edges here. Black is such a high contrast color that it really can bring a lot of dimension to your piece when using it. So if you like things with a lot of contrast and dimension, and it's almost like a wow factor even, I feel like when you're using black, it can look very like, oh wow, that's got some really great contrast. I don't know how to explain it, but it's a really great color to use, and I think a lot of people are afraid to use it because it's so dark. But if you don't like black, obviously try something else. Maybe you use a color on your frame, or maybe you leave it just the natural wood or a light brown color, or just a dark brown. Now these pieces are delicate, so be careful when painting them. Take your time, go slow. All right, so I can still see some of that wood grain there. I'm not sure if I'll do a second coat on this. Black covers fairly well. And a lot of times when you're painting with black, you don't need a second coat. So, all right, so let's take a look at our pieces here. I'm thinking I'll do, because I did black here, I'm thinking I might just do all white with maybe one or two pieces that teal color. So for the small pieces, you can continue using the baby white method to get that stained look, or you can paint them. You can use a different variety of tools to paint your pieces. I prefer using a makeup wedge. This is just a single makeup wedge. You can get a pack of these at Walmart, at the dollar store. And I like to cut mine in half because as a whole, this is kind of a big painting surface. And I can get two applicators out of one since these are smaller pieces. Let's see, so I've got these here. I think I'm going to remove these and paint these white. So I'm kind of rearranging my pieces, thinking about where I want my teals and where I want my whites. So I'm going to go like that. And I'm not going to use the center of my stem. I'm going to leave that open to the back of the pumpkin. So I'm actually just going to toss that piece. Okay. All right, so let's get started. When you're using a makeup wedge, the key is to use a small amount of paint. So I dip it in, tons of paint there, and then what we do is offload it. So then I tap off to the side of my pile of paint here, and I just tap a couple times. That allows this makeup wedge to soak up the paint, and there's no big glob of paint there. And then I'm going to come out to my piece, and I'm going to just tap, tap, tap with a medium to light pressure. It doesn't have to completely cover. We want to do nice light coats. It dries faster that way, and you can get a smoother finish. So let me get these pieces all painted, and I'll show you how splotchy mine looks. I'll show you a close-up here in just a minute. And don't worry about painting the edges. These are all going to sit inside a frame. So most likely you'll be able to see some of that wood still kind of peeking through, and that's okay. This is what a first coat should look like. It's not going to be perfect. When that second coat gets put on, then we'll really see those colors pop. Okay, so then the white. White is a color that does not, that does take quite a few coats to cover. So this one will look super splotchy on that first coat. And there we go. Almost looks like a light brown still. Okay, so let's put those aside. Let's bring out our sunflowers. Again, we're putting a first coat on everything, and then we'll come back with the second coat in a little bit. I'm going to use that dark brown color with a baby white method to paint my centers. Now these pieces have score marks showing the fun design inside the center. You can paint right over those and we'll still be able to see those for putting in some detail later on. Okay. All right, so let's get some color out here. I'm going to start by adding a green out on my palette. I'm going to put a red out here. A yellow. And an orange. I'm going to use a medium-sized brush for this next project, or this next piece. And get my brush wet. And I'm going to start with the base piece. So for this, we don't have to worry about this area because this sits on top of there. So I have shown the score mark where we really don't need to go past here. We do need to paint these leaves, but if you paint inside this piece, you're not going to see it, and same over here. The only area that you really need to take care of is this piece up here. This sunflower is visible, And so when we're painting our leaves, we do want to follow the lines here for the sunflower. So I'm going to start by painting the sunflower first. And I'm just going to use yellow. And I'm just going to start kind of from the center and work my way out around the edges. Because this piece is going to be covered, we really can just kind of be messy at this point here. Okay, and then right up in here is where we do want to take a little more time and paint in those petals. All right, just like that. And we don't have to be too concerned about the center because this is going to sit there as well. I like to just kind of paint the whole thing just so I know that I've covered all my areas and I'm not going to accidentally see some of that wood peeking through. Okay. So then next I'm going to paint my leaves. And I'm going to do a combination of the red, the green, and the orange. So I'm going to start with the red. And I'm going to just come up here. And take my time around the leaves here. We do have those score marks to show the detail in the leaves. You can paint right over those. We'll still see them. There we are. Now, before we move on to painting the other pieces, I do want to point out, if you paint in the score marks, which I want you to, but let's say you want those to really stand out and be bright and defined, you can use any sort of pointing tool. So this has got a pointed edge. It's just a tool I picked up at the dollar store. I think it's called a piercer or an embosser or something. You can use a tack, a needle, anything with a sharp edge like this. And what you can do is come in and just lightly put your pointer in the groove and pull that paint out. I'm going to pull it towards me here. And that just brings back the those defining lines that might have gotten hidden in with paint inside of them. I don't really mind that there's paint inside of them and that some of them kind of get hidden a little bit. But if you really want to pull those lines back out and have them be nice and sharp, you can pull the paint out of them using a tool like this. Okay, so let's see what other ones. Let's do this one red down here. Now, if you're unsure about where your sunflower falls here on the next layer, just bring it up here and kind of just see. Make sure that you're covering all of the leaf that you need to. Okay, and then I'm going to paint this larger leaf down here red as well. So there's lines here that indicate some different leaves happening. So we just want to take our time and paint around those lines. We have three leaves in this area. Fourth one up here is fairly easy to use. But we've kind of got just a smooth oval leaf here. And then more of those large maple type leaves. And then a smaller leaf sitting right there. Okay. All right, and then while I've got red on my brush, I want to paint this little leaf red too. All righty. I'm gonna go orange next. A little tip for your orange, if your orange is too bright maybe, and you want to darken it up or make it more fall orange, if you have a super bright orange, you can always add a dark brown to it to darken it up and make it look more rich, more fall. And the same goes with red. If you're looking for more of a brick red or a fall red, adding a touch of a dark brown, like a burnt umber, really helps pull in those rich fall colors to any color that you have. Same with yellow, same with green. Don't use black. Whoops. I just picked up some yellow paint. That's all right. Black tends to be too cool of a color and will give you not the results you're looking for. You really want to use that brown. All right, and we're going to paint the green. All right, next we are going to finish up with our sunflowers. We're going to go back to that yellow, and I'm just going to pull that paint from the center out to all those little leaves. Okay. Alrighty, there we go. So we've painted all of our pieces that first coat. So the next step will be step 3, where we put a second coat on everything. So let's go back to our first piece. And before I start, I want to mention that the way wood and paint work together. Is when you paint wood, whether it's this kind of wood or any sort of wood, what happens when you apply something wet to an unfinished wood piece is there's going to be little fibers in the wood that stand up. And it's all different depending on how the wood was manufactured or created or cut, and how wet the wood was when it was cut, and all of the things that go with that. So when you're painting after your first coat and you feel your piece and you're like, wow, this is super rough. I mean, and sometimes you can even see kind of areas where the fibers are standing up. That's totally normal. There's nothing wrong with your wood. That's just the property of wood. And so the first part of putting on that second base coat is to look, or the second coat, excuse me, is to look to see if any of your pieces need sanding. After they're dry, you come back and like, this feels a little rough in certain areas. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to take a piece of sandpaper and I'm going to lightly sand it. Now you don't need to sand it to the point where you remove the paint. That would not be productive, because then you'd have to repaint it, blah, blah, blah. So we're just lightly knocking those fibers down. And now I can feel that, and it's back to being smooth. I didn't remove hardly any of my paint, if any. And I can see a little bit here and there, but there we are. It's back to being smooth. So you want to do that with all your pieces. Now, if you've got, you know, your small, delicate pieces like this frame, just be super careful when sanding. I like to just kind of take it and just run it along my piece here. So I'm going to just take this and lay it flat. You want it to be flat on a surface. Don't try and sand it like this, because the pressure between here and what you're sanding could crack your lines here. So sand it while it's flat on your surface. Take your sanding paper and just bring it down your piece like this. There's no need for you to go back and forth like that. Usually that one movement knocks all those fibers down. And then like something like the center, I just start from the top and just slowly move my sandpaper down. I'll check it. I don't go back and forth on delicate pieces. I just go one way. I start at the top and just slowly move my sanding paper down. And if it's not rough feeling, don't feel like you need to sand it. Only sand if you've noticed that the fibers are up and it's super, super rough feeling. Okay. All right, so my sunflowers and everything feel okay. I've sanded the pieces that were rough to the touch, and now we're ready to put that second coat on. I want this to be a little bit darker, so I am going to apply a second coat of that dark brown and see if we can't darken that color up a little bit. I'm looking for something with those dark, rich colors. There we are. A little bit darker there. Second coat is on everything. We're gonna let this dry, and we're gonna move on to the next step, which is step 4, detailing. So I don't really need to do any detailing to this. I'm gonna leave it as is. What you can do if you wanted to is maybe do a little distressing in here. You could use, a chip brush and kind of dry brush inside there, but I think I'm going to wait and see how it looks with this on. The other thing we could do here is do a little distressing. If you have painted this a light color, you can sand it a little bit and add some dry brushing technique to this, where, I'll show you the dry brushing here in just a minute. But you could do that to there, but I am going to leave both these pieces as is for right now. And I'm going to come to my, inside of my pumpkin geometric pieces here. I do want to distress these. So once these are dry, you can come in and sand them. So I'm going to grab my sandpaper and I want to soften the edges of my pieces. So I'm just going to come through and sand just the edges here and pull some of that paint off. You can see how it softened it up. It looks a little distressed and worn. You can take these off the tape at this point and just hold them and sand them if that's easier, or just keep them on the table and sand them. Just be very mindful that they are delicate and to just use a light sanding. If they do crack or you break a piece, they're fairly easily put back together, just with a little bit of glue and a little time for that glue to set up. So here we are. So I'm going to go through and I'm going to sand all the pieces I want to have a distressed look. Okay, everything that I want distressed is sand. The next step is to add some details to the pieces that you want, i.e. in the forms of dry brushing. So let's talk about dry brushing, and then we'll get into adding some color to our leaves and some detail lines. So dry brushing is using an old chip brush. If you have a new chip brush, eventually it will start to look like this. But a chip brush has super bristly, hard, coarse, bristles. And so the bristles make this dry brushing technique super fun and beautiful. So let me just show you that on the back of one of my pieces. Let's say we want to dry brush with a black. What I do is I will tap my brush into the black, okay, and then I'm going to I'm going to offload it. Offloading is just tapping on a clean surface, whether that be on your palette. You can use like a paper towel or sometimes I'll use my old rags here and dry brush, and that removes a lot of the paint. So when you go to brush it on, you're just getting these very, very small hints of color, and it looks super old and distressed. You can like pull in from the edges and you get a cool little distressed, dirty look on your edges. So I'm going to dry brush my centers with some black. Okay, I loaded it and then I offloaded it. And now I want to pull in some from the edges. Just make it have these little black streaks. Start small if you're new to this technique. Use just the very smallest amount of paint, a light pressure, and then build up as you go. So you might add a little more pressure, depositing some more paint if you want some more of that color. You might leave a little more paint on your brush. Always start with a light pressure, see how it's going to apply, and then add more pressure as you want more color on there. So let's show you the difference between the two. You can see I sanded the edges of this. They're nice and light colored. And then I distressed the edges of this. We can see little streaks of black throughout. And it just makes it look kind of old and rustic and a little dirty. And don't be afraid to test things on the back of your pieces. The pieces that are going to be glued on and you won't see, use these as your testing surfaces and kind of see how those brush strokes are going to look, how that distressing might look. And see here, I got a little too much paint. I didn't offload very well, but that's okay. I'm just going to drag that back in. You can use a baby wipe and remove it, get rid of that color. But I'm okay with it kind of just having a small deposit there. It looks a little more natural. I'm going to do a little more on this piece. I want this piece right here to be a little darker than any other piece, because if you think about it, you have the sunflower leaves are going to sit right here, so it's going to create a natural shadow. And so I'm just going to darken that area up just a little bit, adding a little more black right there. Same with this piece. Wherever I'm seeing that cutout, I'm going to add some more black there, creating that shadow where those petals are sitting on top of this. Now this one is the forefront flower center. That's the very first flower we see, so there's really no shadow on that one. There might be a shadow because if you think about it, sunflowers do have a natural curve to them, so there might be a little shadow down below that we can add once we get it put together and kind of do some final details there. All right, so I'm not going to do any dry brushing there. I'm done with my dry brushing for right now. I want to move into adding some detail to my leaves and my sunflower before we get it all put together. So I want to give my leaves some more color. Excuse me, especially this orange one, super bright. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to pull out some burnt umber. Put a little bit of that on my palette. And I'm going to load up my brush with the orange. So I've got a lot of orange there. And then I'm just going to dip that into the brown. Okay. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to start where my petals are touching, the sunflower petals are touching the leaf. And I'm going to pull that color out. And as I pull it, that brown and the orange are mixing together to give me a little bit of shadow right there where that sunflower is touching my leaves. So that sunflower is essentially laying on top of the leaves. So we want to create that shadow. We can also then do it down here. We're going to do the same thing. I'm going to load up with the orange and then just a small little tip into, let's see if I can show you that. It's a very small amount of brown on the tip of my brush. And I'm going to start here and just pull that color to the edge. So I get a lot of brown deposited right here. And then as I pull it out, it's going to fade into that solid or to the orange. So I'm going to do that with all my leaves. I'm going to go into the green, load my green up. Get a small amount of brown on there, and I'm going to do the same with that. Kind of focusing the brown right where those sunflowers are laying. If you get too much brown and you don't like it, just grab a baby wipe, give it a wipe away, and it acts like an eraser, and then you can start over and add a little more green on top to soften it out if it gets to be a little too dark. Okay, kind of play with those colors. And as you're working, you might think this looks a little too dark, this looks a little too dark, because right here, when we see things just on the table, it looks a little different. So I always recommend, if you're unsure or unhappy with how it looks, hold it upright and away from you. Like, you might even have to stand up and walk away from it, and then, you know, prop it up and then walk away from your desk, you know, a couple feet away, and you'll start to see the colors emerge and work together. Whereas, you know, right here, it might look, you know, while we're working, it might look a little off or not right. Maybe we think we're not doing it right. It looks too dark, too light. So step away from your work and then come back to it and see how it looks there. So I'm doing the red, same thing, just adding a little bit of that brown to the tip of my brush and then pulling that color out and letting it fade into the red. All right, we've got some really nice shadows here. The other thing now I want to do is I want to add some other colors, because leaves aren't just red or orange. They also have other colors in them. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to add a little orange to my red. I'm going to load my brush up with the red color, And then I'm going to dip it in my orange. So I'm going to grab some red and orange on my brush. And I'm just going to kind of focus maybe on one side of this leaf here and pull in some of that orange too from the center to the tip. I don't want to cover up my shadow too much. If it's a little too orange, I can add some red back over the top of it and kind of just play around with bringing in some color there. It got a little too close into my shadow, so I'm going to just use my finger, drop it down on there, and brush it off. I've taken off some of that paint, and it brings in back that shadow there. Don't be afraid to use your fingers and kind of push paint around. So I'm going to add a little orange to my red flowers. You can add yellow to them. This got a little too orange right here, so I went back, I grabbed some red. I'm going to lay that right back on top. And just to make sure I don't, I fade in that shadow a little bit, I'm just going to use my finger to pull off some of that paint. Okay. So my green leaves are looking just a little flat. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to add some yellow to those. I've got green on my brush, and then I grabbed a little bit of yellow on the tip. And I'm just going to bring in some yellow. Again, use your finger to pull away some of that color if it's a little too bright, too harsh. Now this one, it can be hard to see, right? It looks a little funky maybe while you're painting it. You're like, ooh, that's really a hard line, a hard yellow line in there. But step away from it. I guarantee you it's going to look great as you bring all your pieces together. And I think I'm going to add a little yellow to the tips of my orange flower or orange leaves here. So just add a little yellow there. Soften those up, maybe a little yellow here. Kind of see where you want additional color. There we go. All right, so we're going to leave our leaves as is for right now, and let's focus on the sunflowers. Let's add some detail and some more color there. So I'm going to start here. Sunflower leaves are not all just yellow, so we're going to add some more color. Let me grab some more yellow out. We want to add a few dark areas in our leaves. So what we can do is we can either go with orange, red, or even just the brown. And we can do a mix of all of those. I'm going to add a bunch of, I'm going to add yellow to my brush. And I'm going to start by just grabbing a little red here. And this flower is in the back. So think about it as you layer. This one is going to be a super bright. This one goes further back, so it might be a little darker, and especially right in this area, we're going to have some shadow where this is shadowing over. And then this one is in the furthest away, so it's going to even be a little darker. And right in this area is going to be super dark because it's going to have shadow. I shouldn't say super dark as in black, but it is darker. So I'm going to grab some red, and I'm going to just take it, start my brush inside the flower here a little ways, and just drag out some color. And I don't hit the entire leaf here. I'm kind of just hitting one side of it. And then I'm going to come back and just pull in and soften out some of those colors. And see how that just creates a line, kind of defining some of those petals. So I used red here. I'm going to switch over. I'm going to grab my yellow, and I'm going to go with some orange. Okay, it's super bright, super dark, or super defined. So I'm going to add a little yellow on top, soften it up. I'm going to go over some of the red ones just to give me a natural gradient. Okay, I've got a little too much orange there. I can wipe it away with my finger or a baby wipe. But instead, I'm just going to bring in some more yellow on top and soften it that way. All right, so right here on this side and this side is where the other petals are laying. So I added a little brown to my mix. Let's add some shadow in right there. Okay. And you can just leave your sunflowers yellow and maybe just add just a little brown to a yellow. You can add a little white to give you just a couple different colors happening in your sunflower. Okay, so let's just layer this on and see how it looks. Remember, this is your center here. Oh, so here you can kind of see I made a mistake. We don't even see those petals down there. The shadow is actually happening about right in this area. So I'm going to pull that off, grab some brown, just bring in a little bit of dark right there. Not a lot. And don't overblend. Leave some of those colors just kind of hard. It just adds to some of that texture that we're looking for. There we go. I think I've got some dark going on there. And don't worry if you're nervous about adding brown to those colors. Don't do it if you don't want to. If you like just the red and the orange happening, that works too. All right. Now let's do this one. Same thing. I'm just going to kind of bounce around, adding yellow, and then a little red to my brush, and then a little orange. You can start at the center and pull in, or you can start on the edge. Wait, start in the center and pull out, or start at the tip and pull in, whatever works best for you. So we're just trying to define some of those petals with a little color. Okay, so I've got a lot of really bold lines. So what I'm going to do next is I'm just going back to just the yellow now, and I'm going to paint right over those and soften them up. Essentially, we're just pushing those colors to the background, softening them up a little bit. If you get too much yellow, you might cover them up completely. But I think that looks good. Okay. Then this one, do the same thing. Looks kind of messy, right? Now I'm going to go back just to my yellow and soften them up. Perfect. All right. So we've got all of our detailing done. I've distressed. And now we can let this dry, let all your, oh, I forgot this little leaf here. So I'm gonna just add a little yellow to this leaf. This one is in the forefront, so I'm not gonna add too many shadowy bits to it. I'm just gonna add some yellow just to soften up that red and make it look a little more natural in the terms of color, having some different color variation there. All right, I think I got all our pieces painted. So that was step 4. We did some detailing, and now we can go in and assemble all of our pieces and kind of see how it looks, and then determine if we need any more detail lines drawn or distressing happening. All right, so let everything dry before you glue. If you have any wet bits, like there's this, glob of paint there, your glue won't stick to that and your pieces will fall apart. Maybe not today, but eventually you won't have a good adhesion. So make sure everything is dry before you start. Yeah. Well, I got about 10 more minutes. Okay, so then we're going to start gluing up. I'm using an instant adhesive, which doesn't need much. So I'm just going to drop some glue here and there. Glue goes a long way regardless of what kind of glue you're using, so don't over glue. So you don't want to have a bunch of glue seeping out from under your piece. You kind of just try and hit really thick points. The other thing when you're gluing up that's helpful is having something heavy or some sort of clamp to help hold your pieces so you can move on while that piece is setting up. So I have these little pink clamps that I got from the dollar store. They come in like a 6-pack and they work fantastic. They're really nice because they have this little plasticky bit. They don't get stuck. If you don't have that, any sort of like paper clip, or not paper clip, chip clips or clothes clips work. Okay, so make sure you line it up around all your edges here. And then I am going to start clipping around once it's all lined up. Okay, so I ended up setting it in there wrong, which left me with some little bits of glue. So I'm just going to take my baby wipe and wipe away that glue before it dries, because it will look a little shiny and kind of give it a splotchy look. If that happens to you and you don't notice, you can kind of go back with a small brush and touch up the area that you want. And if that doesn't work, you can kind of sand it away too. Maybe get a little sanding block in there. There we go. All right, so we're gonna set this aside. This piece is glued up. And I'm gonna glue my sunflower together here. So I'm gonna start with this big piece here and kind of make sure you know where you're going so you're not having to move it around, especially if you're using a stick fast super glue, dries quick. I always recommend doing like a test fit to know where your piece is going to sit so you're not, over moving it. Okay. There we go. And then I'm going to take this piece and glue it on. This is the center to the back flower. And that's just going to sit right inside those petals like a puzzle piece. I don't need to clamp that piece down. It's not going anywhere. The petals are holding it in place. So the next time I'm going to glue this piece down. And this is one where you want to make sure you know where it's going. Make sure your petals are all lined up out here. You don't want to have it flipped around this way or wrong so your petals don't line up. Okay. And then this piece is just going to sit right next to that. So I am going to hold this piece in place while I set my center on there. There we go. And then this. So when you're putting this down, your little cross hatch is going to wave down to this. So if I flip it around, you can see how they curve up. It's going to sit more like this so they curve down. And it sits down in there. Use that score mark as a guide for placing your piece. There we go. And then the last piece is this little leaf here. And see how all those shadows are working together and really giving our piece a lot of dimension. Don't be afraid of those shadows. They really help add that dimension to your piece. There we go. So this set of sunflowers turned out to be a lot darker than this set. And neither one is right or wrong. This has got those lighter colors. And if that's what you love about the sunflowers, don't add all those dark colors like I did. I tend to do things different every time. It's just the way it works when I'm painting. Even if I wanted to use the same colors, it would always look different anyways. Okay. So our sunflower bit is put together. Let's set this aside and dry, and we'll come back to that. This piece is ready. I can take my clamps off because I am using that super glue. Instant Stick. So now I need to decide what pieces I want to use. So I'm going to just drop my pieces in there without glue right now and kind of see how it looks before I commit. I'm not entirely sold on using the white pieces as of yet, but that might change when I put it together because I really, really love that just as it is. I think that looks super sharp, right? But let's throw some white in there. I'm just going to start with some of these bigger pieces and see how it works. Now that, I really love that too. How much dimension is that? That's looking really great. I'm thinking, let's add a few more. And as you're adding your pieces in and you're finding you don't like the colors, again, just paint over them and see how it looks. So that looks great. I don't know if I think we're gonna need these. I think we're just gonna need it all. I think it would go good without the white. Yep, that goes there. All right, that looks super good too. And then let's lay this on top and kind of see how it's gonna lay out. Now see, I think with this on top, I'm not really loving how much contrast there is. If this was by itself, that looks really great. But with this, I think I'm just loving just the lighter colors. So I think I'm going to leave the white out because I want to put my sunflowers on. I'm just going to put this over, tap, and get those other ones out. Get all my pieces out. And let's just bring back just the teal colors. Yeah, I love this. I love how now my yellow is my light in here. See what I'm saying? We've just got some different dimension going on. That white was a little too bright for me, so I'm going to leave that out. And play around with your colors, guys, and see what you like best. All right, so I'm going to leave my white out. We'll push those off to the side. I'm going to take these out one last time, and then we can glue them in. Now in the unboxing video, I mentioned that you can leave the frame off completely and just put in all of the inner bits. And that would give you a completely different look. I showed that in the video. I kind of gave you an example of that. If you go with that route, I do recommend that when you are gluing, you try and keep your glue away from the edge because you're going to use your frame as a guide for gluing all the pieces in. So if you do decide to do that route, find some clamps to clamp the edges. Like, don't glue it down, but do clamp it so all of your edges match up, right? And then clamp it so it stays as you're gluing your pieces in. And then when you're gluing, I can't stress it enough, because otherwise if you get too much glue, and especially on the edges, this glue will push down and then seep onto the edge, which then will catch the edge of your frame and stick that as well. And then you wouldn't be able to pull the frame off. So keep that in mind if you go that route. I hope somebody does. I think that would look super sharp as well, is to have all the pieces in and no frame. But this is the way we went today. Okay, so you can leave it like this and have two separate pieces, right? This can go on the shelf somewhere and this can go somewhere else. Maybe you want to display them differently. You can do that. Or create just one piece, and we're going to glue these on here. So I'm going to glue this off to the side about right here. Now, the one thing to keep in mind is we want this to be able to sit by itself. So when I glue, I'm going to hold it upright like this. It's upright on the table. And then that way, the bottom edge of my sunflowers is going to be right in line with the bottom edge of my pumpkin, so it will sit properly on the table. So I want to have it off to the side a little bit. I kind of want to see some of this. You can have it more towards the center here and covering more of the pumpkin if you want. That's up to you. But I'm going to have it off to the side. So I'm kind of keeping note in the back where I want to, on the pumpkin where I want to glue. Now what you can do is, let's see, where's my tape? To help guide you, we can tape off the area. So maybe I just put a piece of tape here. This is where the top is. And I'm just going to put a piece here like that. And a piece here like that. Okay. So I'm going to pull that away. So what we're going to glue is right in this area on the frame and on the puzzle pieces, the geometric pieces. We don't need to put any glue on that back part because it's not going to touch it. I'm also going to, so I've got my guides up here, but I'm not going to glue probably a 1/2 inch, or I'm going to start my glue about a 1/2 inch away. So I'm going to start like way down here because I don't want, there's so much happening here. I want to make sure I don't have any glue where I'm going to see it. So I've got my guide. I'm going to drop a couple pieces or a couple drops on my frame, staying about a 1/2 inch or so away. And then on this piece, again, a 1/2 inch away from my guide. So I started about just right in here, and that will be enough to hold my sunflower on. So when you're getting ready to glue, I'm going to hold it upright, and I'm going to set my sunflower on the table. I'm going to set my pumpkin on the table, and I'm just going to slide that over to the edge here and hold it. So I want it to be able to stand upright, so those bottom edges have to be in the same line. And as I'm holding it, I can take away this tape, make sure that goes away. And then I can gently lower it, making sure it doesn't move. And there we go. So we're going to let that set up for a few seconds, and then we can add some fun ribbon at the top. I'm going to flip it around, and I'm going to work on adding my ribbon up here. I gave you a lot of different ribbon. I gave you quite a few pieces of raffia, a long string of jute, and then this really pretty lacy stuff, which I thought worked well with this and the kind of rustic nature of it. I really love this. If you want to darken this up, you can paint this ribbon. You can add some texture to it so it looks like it's worn, maybe just some areas of brown paint on it so it looks a little dirty. You can even paint your raffia. I painted raffia a darker color if you want. I tend to just have a piece of paper out and I tape my piece down and then I just brush color on it. So you can do that as well, another option. What I'm going to do is I'm going to start by tying my raffia on. So I grab as much as I can between my two fingers. I'm going to wrap it underneath and bring it up. I'm going to tie it in a knot. Now the pumpkin top has this gradual where it gets, goes from big to small. So it's got this incline up here, which can be hard to tie around. So I kind of try and hold it while I tie it. Now I'm not going to do a pretty bow with my raffia. I'm just going to double tie it to create a knot to hold it in place. If you're having, you know, issues with it sliding up your top of your pumpkin, you can go to the back here and put a little dab of glue right here and then hold it so that the raffia stays. And I think I'm going to do that because it is kind of sliding around. You can just use any type of glue, or even a glue gun if you have one, works really well. A glue gun works really well with ribbons and things because of the texture of it. Sometimes super glue doesn't work. You can also just tape it down if you want with, you know, your masking tape or whatever in the back. And then I stick my finger to it. There we go. Okay, so we've got this funkiness going on. That's okay. We're going to clean that up here in just a little bit. Where'd my jute go? Oh, there it is. All right, so then next I'm going to tie these two together. And I want my bow kind of off to the side, so I'm trying to keep that knot there off to the side. And just like you would tie a shoe, I'm just gonna create kind of a little funky bow. Okay, and it looks like this, right? Sometimes people get hung up, they're like, oh, it looks terrible. But I'm gonna turn it around just so I can reach it a little bit. I tend to just remind people that bows always need fluffing. They never look great right out of the gate. What I'm going to do is I'm going to separate my jute from my ribbon. Okay, and I'm going to try and just kind of position it so my tails go down. Oh, and I guess it wants to lean the other way. Depending on how you tie it will determine how your tails are going to go here. There we go. So I've got my tails coming down. And got my raffia kind of sticking out. My edges here like this. Now my raffia is too long, which might happen to you. So we're just going to trim it up. I did have scissors here, yes. Okay, give it a little trimming. And then your raffia, if it's too thick, you can separate these pieces and make it even more stringy looking. I like the thinner look better, so I tend to just tear mine. I get these nice stringy look, the stringy look from the raffia. And see how that made it a little fuller? And I'm just going to play with my bow a little bit, rearranging that jute and the lace. So I want my lace and my jute loops are coming down, and then my jute tails are coming down. I'm going to trim up this tail here. And then I like to open up my tails of my jute. Get this really fun stringy curly look, which I think looks like curly cues on the pumpkins, the vines. Let's cut that just a little bit. Don't be afraid to cut those tails if they get to be too long. And let's just untangle some of that. There we go. Got some coming out the top. Trim that guy a little bit more. And there we are. All right, there we go, guys. That is the last step of our pumpkin and sunflower tutorial. Oh, one last thing I do want to mention is you can add a little more detail to your sunflower and pumpkin by adding some highlights, just a little white on your brush, and do like a little flick of your brush to the tops here. Just shows that maybe there's some light coming off. You do the same to some of your leaves. Kind of think about if your sun is coming from this way, you want your light, you know, you want the light or that reflection to kind of be on those pieces that are going to be hit by the sun. And then you can add some little black to that if you want. Maybe you want to pull out that crosshatch, so you can add some black inside those lines. And they don't have to be all of them or solid. Just hit a few of them. And there we go. The last step. All right. So there's a couple different ways that you can do yours. One with more of the lighter color, with that light brown background. I did the light brown stain here. I did the dark stain on here, still with the teal center. I did some lighter yellow coloring here, and then a darker version. So play around with your colors, have fun. I hope you enjoyed this month's Joy Box. I'm so excited it's fall. I'm excited to be back at it. And happy crafting, guys. Thanks for watching. Bye.